Now, I would like to pass it on to Leanna. So, Leanna, feel free to, start sharing a little bit about who you are, your business, and then we can get started in learning a little bit more about your topic from today.
Awesome. Yeah. So my name is Leanna Lee. I am a content writer and strategist. Most of my work is, I'd say pretty much all of my work at this point is in the tech industry. So I've had a good bit of experience working with, I was just talking to Tracy about this, working with companies who not only produce tech, maybe their software as a service, maybe they offer certain products, or their service and offering runs on tech. So one of my biggest clients is Patreon, the crowdsourcing platform. So that's kind of an example of one end. And then I also work with a large pharmacy tech platform as well, which is very busy at the moment, if you can imagine. So most of what I do is long form content. So the big, heavy, authoritative content that a lot of companies need, like blogs, case studies, ebooks, that sort of thing. But what I've been working more on in the past couple of years is connecting those to strategies, because one of the biggest struggles as a writer is working on content that has no plan behind it. We can be fantastic at our jobs, but if the content has no purpose, no direction, and there's no plan behind it, then we're just shouting into the void, essentially. So I think a lot of tech companies and brands in particular struggle with that, and struggle with maintaining presence on all these different channels that are available now. So that's kind of been my focus recently, and that's what I want to talk about today. So should I just dive in, Ari, or did you want to?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I wasn't sure how to introduce the five different. So I have five main tips for you all today, and I'll just go through each of them in turn with a couple different notes on each one. If Ari, if you have any questions for me or you want to clarify something, jump right on in.
Yeah, and if anyone have any questions during Leanna's presentation, feel free to just drop them on the chat and I will be moderating them for Leanna.
Excellent. Awesome. So the first one is, the first tip is to choose a new content goal based on what your business needs right now. So hopefully, whether you're working as a tech brand or for a tech brand, your company has some kind of content goal, or at least it has had until this current situation. And the coronavirus has changed a lot for obviously many companies and many people. One of those being, well, what the heck do we post now? What do we share? How do we share it? What's going on? So for companies that may not be in the mainstream, that is, if you're in an endangered industry and you are noticing fewer customers, decreased business, then you might want to consider a content goal that focuses more on lead generation, on conversion rates, on demo signups if you're a software company. If you have noticed, one of the clients I mentioned is a pharmacy tech company. They've seen a huge increase in business. They're at the point where they just can't, they almost can't handle the volume. So at that point, they've had to take another look at their content goal and say, okay, well, we really don't need more leads at the moment. How do we stem the flow? So for them, a better content goal looks more like, how can we retain these customers over time? How do we focus on brand awareness? How do we focus on month-over-month social engagement as opposed to bringing those leads in upfront? They're looking more at long-term stability, longevity, and awareness. So part of that content goal is having that clear business outcome. And the majority of that is focusing on what the end result you want to have is. So again, conversion rates, leads, subscribers. There are a bunch of different content goals that you can work with, but they really, really tie back to where your business is now and what you need to accomplish throughout the rest of the year, whether that means bringing on more customers and clients, or that means kind of managing the customers and clients you have already. So my second tip, if there aren't any questions about that, my second tip is offering value by getting to know your buyers again. So you have a content goal, which is fantastic. You know kind of where your business sits in the market right now, but you may not know who you are approaching anymore, because along with companies, this situation has also really, really changed how people buy, what they're looking at, what they're using, how they're thinking. So your complete buyer personas may have done a 180. So looking at not only what you need as a business, but what your buyers need, what your customers and clients need, is another huge part of developing that content strategy that's really going to work right now. And unfortunately, that is all we can do at the moment. Whether you're a single individual like Ken, who's got services to offer, whether you're in a larger business. There's really no way to plan long term at the moment. So looking at what you can do, well, what you need right now, this quarter, this month, and looking at what you can do for your customers and clients right now, this week, this month, this year, is kind of the best way to hone in on that, because it's just going to change. I've heard it said that companies are going to go through 5 or 6 phases of different marketing, different kind of business stages, from crisis and panic to new normal, sort of running the gamut there. And they may be at different phases at different times. They may circle back to go through different stages. So having a plan for the here and now is really the ideal. So getting back to the buyers, once you've revisited those buyer personas, as you're doing that, you're looking at, how are they responding? What do they, and I have a resource I can share for this, but what has their response to COVID been? So that could be, that could mean anything from, maybe they're spending at a normal rate because they fall into a certain bracket of income, a certain industries. Maybe they are tightening up all spending because they're in an endangered industry, or they may be more at risk. It really kind of depends. So also looking at new needs and pain points. Video conferencing platforms like Zoom have just taken off just in a crazy way, because that is what people need at the moment. So that's something that they've had to adjust to. Had to adjust to increase business. They've had to adjust to increased stockholders. They've had to adjust to increased inquiries, and their entire business across all departments has had to make pivot and make adjustments for that. So thinking about how your business can adjust to meet those needs. Where are your customers at? What are they really looking for right now? Sorry, I lost my place here. Probably the biggest struggle I've noticed with tech brands is they often fail to connect tech with people, the humanizing tech. And that's not the case for all of them. I see that mostly in more software-based brands, and some brands do an excellent job of connecting them. A Patreon, I think, is one of them. Because the effect on people, the benefits are very, very clear. But in a situation like this, it becomes even more important to show empathy in content, to have a very conversational, relatable voice, to write all your content in a voice that people can easily understand and appreciate, and to connect it very, very clearly and effortlessly, with not only your content goal, but with those new buyer needs.
Hey, Leanna.
Yeah,
sorry to cut you off. I do have a quick question around this.
yeah.
So you mentioned that the company will go through a few different phases, right? And I feel like in the first month of the quarantine, or even like the first couple of weeks, people are definitely trying to put up the message that is more on a calm, not calmer per se, but it's more like really trying to just say, yeah, we're on the same boat. We know how you feel, that type of thing. But what about now? Now that we're like over a month and things like that, have you seen some content change, or like the language and the messaging that is slightly different that people are using now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think based on the clients I'm working with, I'm really seeing the shift out of crisis communication and management into more of we're not quite at a new normal, but a lot of companies are trying to, they've bombarded customers and clients with all the emails about how we're handling this and how we're going to help and how we're protecting you, etc. And they've reached the point where they've sort of played that out. And a month, 6 weeks, 2 months into the situation for most people in the country, a lot of companies are having to take another look at their calendar and say, well, what now? We can't just keep mentioning coronavirus every 5 minutes. People are getting tired of it. And the concern that people are, it's sort of like mass trauma at this point. So a lot of people are just not engaging with news and content because they're concerned about, hearing about the coronavirus all the time. They want to escape from that. They want to read, that see and hear content that isn't necessarily coronavirus related. So what I'm noticing my clients doing is taking a step back from crisis management and crisis communication and looking at it more from a humanitarian standpoint. So still how we're supporting, but more putting customers and clients in the spotlight. So the pharmacy tech brand I'm working with, we've been doing a lot of spotlights on how our products have been helping people at this time. So it's less about how you deal with coronavirus and more about how what we're doing is supporting people in this situation. You see the difference. There's kind of a degree of separation there, but it's still making them sound very customer centric, very relatable, very sympathetic, without bombarding people with the same message. So I'm seeing that trend across quite a few clients. And I think we're going to be moving forward with that, where their editorial calendars look a little bit more mixed up. They may still have some timely, and I'm going to talk about that in one of the next tips, but they'll have some timely posts that relate to the current situation, but they'll also be going back to revisiting larger industry topics and trends that may still be relevant, but they may not mention COVID at all. They may be more evergreen topics, they may be more overall industry news topics, but they recognize that everyone's just kind of burnt out, and we need to be able to talk about and focus on other things.
Makes sense. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Of course. So let's see here. Oh, the other note I had was a life insurance platform that company that I'm working with at the moment. This is a great example of a company that offers a service that is shared through a tech platform, but they're not necessarily a tech company themselves. But what they've been doing is pretty much exactly what I just talked about, mentioned to Ari, was that what are people concerned about right now? They're concerned about finances. They're concerned about employment. They're concerned about protection if something goes wrong. Well, life insurance is perfect for that. So a lot of the content I've been working on for them is around financial protection, emphasizing cost-effective strategies and plans. If you or your company has created kind of packages and special promotions for this current situation, then that is, there's a semi-promotional aspect to it as well. But I think from what I've seen, customers' tolerance for promotional content is also pretty low, unless you can really, really direct it back to a current, very, very clear need they have at the moment. So that's kind of another trend I'm noticing. So that brings us to tip number 3. Don't ditch old content just yet. A lot of companies have been in the news for some really tone deaf strategies and campaigns, and everyone's like, don't want to be them. But just because you wrote it before COVID does not mean it isn't still valuable. What you need to be doing instead is kind of revisiting through the lens of your new business outcome, that new content goal, what you really need this year, through the lens of what you know your buyers need, your customers and clients need right now. You can take a look at that old content and say, okay, well, I was planning to post this piece about personal finance and credit cards this month, but I don't think the tone sounds all wrong and some of the wording is a little bit off. But knowing that a lot of people are maybe struggling with credit card debt or aren't sure how to maximize the use of their credit cards right now, you can sort of pivot to refocus that content and just give it a little bit of new life, but still kind of bring it back to the current situation and those current needs. I keep saying current because that is, again, you're looking short term, very, very short term. And that's another tip. We'll get to that in a sec, but keep that in mind. So don't ditch old content just yet. Also, don't forget evergreen content. Evergreen content is still good. It may need a little bit of a facelift because just because it's evergreen does not mean it shouldn't be sympathetic and timely, or at least relevant, shall we say. So keep in mind that those pieces you may have on best tips for creating certain kinds of videos on your phone, to best practices for running a certain kind of business, those tips may still be relevant. You may just have to add or remove a few tips, or just adjust the language a little bit to remain sympathetic to the audience. And if you have specific tips or questions about how to do that, you can always get in touch with me outside of this event, or feel free to post a question to Ari. What else did I have for this? So alongside with content offerings as well, of course. Looking at, maybe you were planning to introduce a new package, maybe you had a new offer, a new summer offering you were planning to test in the next couple of weeks or month. So keep in mind that, that could be some of the wording, some of the messaging, some of the approaches may be considered a little bit tone deaf at this point. Just try and look at it with fresh eyes. Are you using pictures with crowds in them? A little bit tone deaf at the moment. Are you? I've heard a few companies using viral. That's become a really awkward word just at the moment. So keeping in mind that even small things like word choice and image choice can turn an audience off from your content. And then even if you look at your editorial calendar and you're like, I can't use any of this, all my content ideas are just, all the content I have written is not working, don't panic. It's okay to go back to the drawing board. Some of these old pieces may still provide new ideas. So maybe you just need a completely new angle on an old topic. Maybe you just need to, that can provide the foundation for a deep dive. If perhaps an evergreen topic is not going to necessarily work, you can adjust it a little bit to say, take a look at the same topic from where the current, where your business is, where a business is, where the current industry is right now. So that's just kind of another idea that you can use. I see we have a question here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So going back to number 2 and humanizing your tech, how do you figure out what content and voice is best for your customer? That's the question from Allison.
Okay. I think it really comes down to connecting to that need. So that's where kind of the buyer personas become so important. So they say that if you look at the, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we've got kind of self-actualization at the top, and we've got really, really basic needs like food and shelter at the bottom. We're still kind of in the first couple. I think it's below love and belonging, but there's like the first three, there's sort of basic needs where it's connection and food and shelter, and I can't remember for the life of me what the second one is, but trying to take a look at where your audience is with that. And if you know that they are really, really concerned about losing their jobs, or they're really, really concerned about where the next meal is coming from, they're pretty low on that hierarchy of needs. So in terms of, that doesn't really answer the question about brand voice. In terms of brand voice, informality is going to be your friend at the moment. If you or your company is using a very formal, very jargon heavy, very dense kind of brand voice, that's not going to be your friend, because people are struggling to take in heavy content. I've actually seen that quite a bit with companies putting off some of their more in-depth, high-tech content projects, because people just may not have the attention span for them. They just want to look at the news, maybe read something light, and then just get off and live their lives. So unless it is very, very specifically related to something that they need. So conversational, so things like using contractions, things like using second and third person instead of, first and second person instead of just third person. Ways to kind of lighten up the content, using shorter words, using shorter sentences. There are ways to kind of frame the content, even with basic word choices, where you can draw the speaker in, or draw the reader in, and make it feel like a conversation instead of like a lecture. So I think that's the biggest change I've noticed, is that trend towards a bit more of a casual, conversational tone. Let me know if that answers your question, or if I can clarify a bit more.
I had something too, like Ken was talking about content, and he's got his app, or anybody has their thing. And I think sometimes we're so busy trying to tell about our thing or the content that it becomes a very sales forward facing approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes you have to look at the information you have and how does it benefit someone else.
Yes.
I remember when I was talking to these guys, and they do a parking app, and they were talking about content, and I was like, but you have all this research you've done, all this fascinating information about how people park and what they do, or different things. And I was like, you should turn that into content, because all the research you did, whatever company you're in, you did a lot of research, and you know more about that topic than anyone else. Even if you're just putting out content that's sort of like, hey, did you know, or this is really fascinating. If you're in a talent acquisition app, well, you've learned a lot about how people acquire talent, how people stay in jobs, that I think sometimes, especially now, it's stop talking about yourself and share something you've learned, and then that positions you as an expert. But I'd love to hear, kind of, Leanna, any of your ideas on something like that. Like Kim was like, I want people to notice my app, and he's on here so he can punch in and say, but what's advice for when you're trying to sell what you have or raise awareness for what you have, but you don't want to sound like that's what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that goes back to the example I had of taking a step back and putting a degree of separation between you and the offer. So talking about your services through the eyes and mouths of your customers and clients. So testimonials, quotes, how this has helped us, how we did this, how we made this work, how we increase business because of my service. Those kinds of things offer that. It's still promotional for sure, but it's now real people advocating for your services, promoting your services for you, and it makes it feel a lot less smarmy in the current climate. So that's one way. The other way really goes back to, again, the client persona or the buyer personas. Again, well, what are your clients really looking for at the moment? So with Ken, for example, with his app, which I think is really cool, VR is huge at the moment. AR is not far behind. So I can see a lot of people being interested in his app because it theoretically connects them to family members. You know, you can have I could see a lot of great content around trying to get your grandma to look at photos in an AR setting. That would be sort of a fun, funky way to do it. That connection, which is huge at the moment, that harkens back to our struggle with, you know, social distancing and so forth. Keeping up with family members, that's another big one. And the technology aspect, which is also very big at the moment. I know that the Google VR products and AR products are really big. All those games in VR, and Netflix is having a grand old time with their VR shows. They're offering shows in VR now, and it's an escape. So there's the connection, there's the escape, there's the family aspect. And so you've got three different, they may not be necessities, but they are still on that kind of little triangle of needs right there, and those are really hitting home at the moment. So I think if you could connect what you have back to a very basic need, and also try and find others to advocate the service for you, I think those are kind of the main strategies that I'm seeing working right now. Are there any more questions, or should I keep going?
I think you're good. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll keep going then. Yes. So number 4 is think outside the blog. Every piece of content can become 3 to 5 to 10, 20, as many as you like, really, without becoming repetitive. So you may not have the bandwidth for an entire podcast team or video production teams, though I'm sure Tracy could tell you that you don't necessarily need a huge team to do a good job. But there are plenty of ways to repurpose content in your editorial calendar. So if you have an idea for a blog series, you can kind of, how do I say this? You can sort of scale it up, if you will, and create longer, more in-depth content like a guide or an ebook that'll draw in potential customers and clients. Or you can scale it down to where that becomes part of your social media content calendar. And those are just kind of 2 examples on kind of bookend examples. But you can also, go out to multimedia content where it becomes a webinar. The blog post series, you could take one of the blogs and turn that into a webinar. You could have a video series that follows the blog series, or maybe the video series expands on a single point in the blog. There are a lot of different ways to kind of build out from a single piece of content. That's called, I believe it's called the spoke strategy or the wheel strategy. Definitely look into that. It's really, really helpful because not only does it save you time, it makes it a lot easier to build out a content calendar and to strategize kind of if you have an overarching topic for a week or a month or a specific channel like your blog or your YouTube channel. It gives you a foundation to work with, and it helps you populate, the social media channels. And it also keeps your resources down. So if you are working with fewer people, if you're working with less time, less money, as so many of us are, knowing that these are the main topics you want to work with, these are the channels you have to work with, and how you can kind of fit those in together, that can save you a lot of time and energy. And maybe it's even time to explore a new a new channel. You know, if you're doing well on LinkedIn and you want to give Instagram a try, it's a great way to repurpose content. If you've always wanted to start a podcast and you can do it in a way that won't completely deplete your resources, why not? If you want to talk to Tracy about video content, you know, absolutely. It's very much, it is a great time, I think, to explore different platforms, because so many more people are online at the moment. So many more people are consuming content on different platforms in different ways. And it'll give you a sense of whether or not this will work for your audience. Keep in mind, though, that everything I'm talking about is for the current climate. I can't say that often enough, because in 3, 6, 12 months, you'll be doing this all over again, because things will have changed by then. The situation, needs, purchasing habits, etc. That's something that you'll want to take a look at down the road. So always keep in mind the bigger picture, so that content goal, what your clients need, what your clients and customers need, and how you can reuse what you currently have. And that will help you sort of populate your editorial calendar, populate those channels, and produce content for the short term. And by short term, I mean, for tip number 5, don't plan content out more than a few weeks, or at the most a month ahead. And so for me as a perfectionist, I really sort of cringe at the sound of that, because I like planning ahead as far as possible, but it's just not doable right now, unfortunately. In one of the courses I was taking recently, the teacher said to write your calendar in, quote, virtual pencil, which I thought was really neat. I prefer to see it more like guidelines. If anyone watched Pirates of the Caribbean, one of my favorite movies. So you're looking at editorial content more like guidelines, as a guideline, more than a set in stone, execution of your strategy, because you're not out of the woods yet. Even if you're very busy at the moment, you need to be able to pivot at will, because things could change. Your customers may suddenly not need what you thought they did a few weeks ago. They may suddenly stop spending money on your product or service for whatever reason. So it's good to have a backup plan. And by a backup plan, I mean the ability to stay flexible. So especially if you're done with crisis communication, that was sort of an easy one, because you sort of had kind of the one topic to work with. It was coronavirus. Now that we're so kind of past that, and I sort of hesitate there, because we could go back to it. Absolutely. If we hit another wave, if something happens and, we end up with a resurgence, then you might be right back in crisis comm mode. You just don't know. So it's good to just keep an eye and ear out on what's going on. It's good to kind of balance out your content with evergreen ideas, what people will need regardless. People will always need to know about personal finance topics around tax use, and people will always need to know how to handle deductions. People will always need to know in springtime how to plant gardens, how to take care of pets. So these are sorts of topics that never get old. You just have to be aware of where you are right now and what people are looking for right now. So keeping in mind that since we've sort of inched by the crisis communication stage for now, you want to sort of minimize COVID-19 related content, unless the one caveat is if your business is directly connected. So if you work with or for a healthcare company, or if you produce tech that is related to healthcare or related to hospital or field hospital work or medical manufacturing, then those are still absolutely relevant. But if you're not an expert and your company is not directly connected, then your customers are probably going to get pretty tired of it pretty quickly. So it's good to just have your say and move on, and definitely refer to it sometimes when necessary. Be sympathetic to, be sensitive to what is happening, but try to focus largely on the customers. You know, what do they need? What are they looking for? And what does your business need? So that's my 5 tips. I would love to hear more about your all situations, what questions you have, see if we can workshop a few things. I also have a few resources for you that I forgot to pass on to you. Ari, sorry.
No worries. We can drop them on the chat as well, and I will copy them into some sort of like, I don't know, email and things like that, and I will email it to everyone who have registered for this event.
I will, once I figured out how to, oh, there's chat.
Yeah, the chat is right there on the window on the bottom. Awesome.
Oh dear.
Thank you.
None of my links worked, so I will have to email them to you.
Okay, no worries. That's fine. Anybody else have any questions for Leanna before we wrap it up? I know we're like getting close to 1 o'clock. Tracy, are you good? Tracy, you're on mute.
Sorry, I stuck my microphone behind the chat. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think what you bring up is so interesting that sometimes I think we focus on, okay, I'm going to make my year-long calendar and plug everything in, and you forget to pay attention to what people are doing right now. Like, I think what's interesting, Ken put his app in the chat and he's talking about floating photos. And I'm like, right now, people are all at home. They're all trapped with their stuff. They're going through closets. They're going through things. So if you have something that does photos or is a craft or some hobby thing that people will do, that's content. Like, that's, think about where the people are, where your customers are and what they're doing. And that's worthwhile. You know, maybe it's worth a Facebook ad to throw out to people for, you know, in behavioral, anyone who's visited Shutterfly, anyone who's visited Photo Stick. I keep getting this crazy ad in my Facebook about the Photo Stick. And I think I'm like about another day from buying it because the thing popped up so many times because I'm like, ooh,
oh, they wear you down. They really do.
They do. Like, I'm like, oh my God, I'm sitting around with my computer, or I just opened a closet that had 1 million photos and I'm like, what do I do with this? And it's like, my phone's listening and they're like, we can do this. So I think, you know, I used to work in TV news and that was something I never thought people took advantage of. Like, whenever we had a flood, I was like, I think every photographer should be calling into midday shows because they do photo restoration. And you've just had all these people in a flood who've gotten ruined pictures or lost pictures or things like that. You know, like right now, it sounds so morbid, but there are a lot of people who passed away unexpectedly. And now you're like, oh my God, we don't have our last family picture. Now, you know, saying something where, oh, I do a service where I can put, you know, grandma in the picture, I can make these collages, or I can do these things. You know, you have to kind of pay attention. And I don't think it's morbid, but I worked in news, so I have a very low threshold. But, you know, if I'm able to help someone, like right now, people are bored, they're stressed, they want control. So if you have something that helps them organize their life, helps them do something nice, helps them remember memories or time, you know, like whatever you're looking to market, what makes this the perfect time for your product? And that's the content that needs to be, that's where you shift the content.
Oh, I so agree with you.
There's literally no product, because this is what I did for a living in news, because PR people would call me and say, here's what I'm doing. And I'd be like, okay, so what's the story angle on this? There's literally, I think, almost no product on earth that I could not find you an angle for why it's important right now. You know, you just, sometimes you have to reshift the approach of what you're doing. And I think, Allison, that's really important in marketing. Like, you're getting in the marketing world. That is really important, is you're watching people shift and shifting the language and finding a voice. I mean, there is so much amazing branding and marketing going on right now that is mind blowing what people are doing. You know, all the We Care videos where they're taking social media stuff and thanking the people out there. It's really about just trying to be in the moment of whatever you're doing content wise.
Yeah, one of my favorite responses was Carvana. They have this ridiculous car vending machine thing, which I thought was the most, you know, upper 1% idea ever. You know, buying a car on the internet and getting it delivered to you. Who the heck would do that? Well, then we had a global pandemic and it became like the coolest idea ever.
Yeah, because you became like a horrible person for wanting to go to a car lot. Like, I know, it's crazy.
All of a sudden it was contact-free delivery, and they were able to spin that so quickly. And I just admire the heck out of that, because it went from being a really odd business idea in my mind to something that could offer value. And that's what it comes down to, is offering value. How can this offer value to someone? It doesn't, yeah, death is, it's maybe a morbid thought, but that's the reality right now.
But it's something you just said. Two things that I think are really interesting is they changed the language. We'll deliver to your house, and now it's contact-free delivery.
Mm-hmm.
They changed it. You can't expect the people to know like what it is. Like, they actually changed it to now contact-free delivery. All the Airbnbs are like safe and sanitized cleaning. Like, they didn't change anything about themselves. They just changed the language. I think that's really interesting right now. And so many services are now looking at that. And I don't think it's morbid, because you are coming from a place. Now, everybody's coming from a place where you want to sell or make money or keep your job helping people sell. But if you can look at it as, we can really help you, and you're approaching it with the intent of, why is this beneficial to you right now? That's what you have to focus on. It's not taking advantage. I think Ari and I talked about this. It's grabbing an opportunity, not taking advantage. Yes. And it's semantics, but it's a real thing. You're not taking advantage of the situation. You're finding an opportunity to help people, and your product has whatever you have to offer.
Yes. Yes. And so many industries are struggling. I mean, as a writer, I've struggled with this too. A lot of us writers have had to sort of just, figure out, well, should we be contacting agencies right now? Should we be contacting companies right now and saying, hey, I need work? How do I approach this? But really, that's the answer, is offering value. A lot of marketing agencies are struggling to keep up with the workload, because all of a sudden people need a ton of marketing, and they can't handle it themselves because they're busy taking care of day-to-day operations. So we're offering to help them deal with the workload. We're stepping in to take the place of coworkers who are sick, or coworkers who may have had to look after sick family members. So there's, reframing that in a way that does not sound it's still promotional, of course, but you are putting the client or customer first. And that's really what it comes down to right now, is that empathetic approach. So